So now that we're familiar with the Keeling curve, carbon dioxide, emissions from coal and natural gas-fired power plants, and the IPCC's latest information, we are now confronted then with this question. Should we continue using coal, natural gas, and petroleum to power our modern lives? If yes, we need to then consider the question, how are we going to confront the coming food, habitat, resource conflicts, and refugee challenges that are undoubtedly on their way? We haven't addressed that question as a society anywhere near to anyone's satisfaction yet. But if we continue to burn coal, natural gas, and petroleum, these things are going to be increasingly prudent in order to address. If we decide not to keep burning coal, natural gas, and petroleum, then we have a whole other question. How are we going to shift to renewable energy resources that are not carbon intensive? And how is that going to happen in a stable way that doesn't disrupt society, that's not disruptive, and then that's also secure? And very importantly, how are we going to afford it? Should we have more taxes? Should we have penalties? How is this going to be paid for? And of course, then there's the middle ground. Well, maybe we should keep using coal, natural gas, and petroleum, but maybe wean ourselves away. So that's the kind of the maybe position here. So how can we wean ourselves off carbon-intensive energy resources in a stable, non-disruptive, and secure manner that we can afford, similar to the no position? And then, very importantly, if we go down the sort of maybe route of doing a little bit of a lot of things, what renewable energy resources should we support? There's a lot out there, and there's no one perfect answer. So which one should we support? And of course, then, how are we going to pay for the development of that, or the development of those? That question hasn't been resolved either. There's a lot of things happening right now. There's a lot of irons in the fire regarding our energy resources and where we're going. So as people consider these, as policymakers consider these issues, as scholars and as countries and government officials consider these questions, there's some large topics that always come up, and they include things like maybe carbon emissions should be taxed. Of course, if you're a carbon emitter, you of course don't like this idea, but then of course you might pass those taxes on to the consumers, and that means you and I who use electricity and or drive a vehicle. Should we be taxed for our carbon emissions? Other discussions include things like increasing methane generation at the expense of coal. That is, weaning ourselves away from coal and increasing methane generation. And that's because methane, as you already know, has about half of the CO2 emissions that a coal-fired power plant does. Should we go down that road? Should we maybe increase our nuclear and renewable energy generation? Neither of those have a carbon issue associated with them. Perhaps we should raise our vehicle emission standards and thereby use fewer gallons of gas to drive the same number of miles that we do now. If that's the case, well, how is that going to be adopted? What's the timeline, and what's it going to cost? It's always about cost in many respects. And finally, discussions revolve around this technology called carbon capture and sequestration. Sometimes it's called carbon capture and storage. This basically is the idea that since power plants create carbon emissions, maybe we can take this carbon from the stack and put it in the ground before it goes in the atmosphere. If this is the case, then how are we going to pay for that? What areas are geologically appropriate for that? And of course, where is it being able to be successfully implemented? So these are the big questions that revolve around this issue. Where you stand is basically up to you, but at least now you are empowered with some information about this problem. As a final note, I'd like to remind us that this is not a political issue. I think unfortunately it has been politicized. It's not a Democrat or a Republican, a liberal versus a conservative problem. This is a problem for humanity, for the earth, our home, for the plant and animal life on on our home. And we need to get beyond the political issues and get into the science of this. And this hopefully has been instrumental in providing you with the right tools that you need in order to make your own best decisions about which policies you'd like to support regarding your own energy consumption and your own position on climate problems.